The wine bottle cost about $340. I know because I'd priced it myself, standing in the shop for 20 minutes deciding whether to spend that kind of money on a bottle we'd drink in one sitting to celebrate 40 years of marriage. My son poured it out on the driveway like it was garden hose water, and it ran into the storm drain in less than 4 seconds while he stood over it laughing. My wife screamed, but not at him. At me, for what I did about 30 seconds later, which is the part of this story that actually matters. 10 minutes before that, everyone at that anniversary dinner had watched a 66-year-old man sit there and take it, calm as a Sunday afternoon, like nothing in the world could touch him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. And still, somehow, my own son ended up on his knees in the driveway of the house I built, screaming for something he could never get back. 15 years ago, if you'd told me I'd do what I did that night, I'd have told you that you had the wrong man. I've spent my whole life being the guy who holds families together, not the one who lets them come apart in his own front yard. But if you've ever bitten your tongue so many times you forgot you had a voice of your own, this one's for you. Before I get into it, do me a favor and hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what town you're watching this from tonight. I like knowing where these stories end up. All right, let me tell you about the night a bottle of wine ended a lot more than a bottle of wine. My name is Harold Whitfield. I'm 66 years old, and for 34 years I ran the electrical maintenance department at a paper mill outside Albany, New York. I climbed towers in ice storms so the whole town would still have lights on Christmas morning. I retired 4 years ago with 2 bad shoulders, a permanent ringing in my left ear, and hands that still shake a little in cold weather from 3 decades of vibration tools. My wife Diane and I bought our house on Larchmont Drive back in 1988, a plain colonial with green shutters she picked out herself because she said green was the color of a house that meant to stay put. I built the back porch with my own 2 hands over 2 summers, and the koi pond took me another summer after that, digging it out by hand because I didn't trust a rented excavator not to hit the gas line. Diane is still with me, thank God, though her memory has started slipping in small ways that scare me more than I let on. She forgets which grandchild is which sometimes. She never forgets the porch, though. She still asks me every evening if I've fed the fish. Our anniversary dinners used to be the one night a year that felt untouchable. Same backyard, same string lights I restring every May, same recipe for prime rib that Diane taught me back when we were newlyweds living over a laundromat with nothing but a hot plate and stubbornness. I still use her spice rub, written on a note card that's gone soft at the corners from 40 years of handling. Rosemary, garlic, a little bit of instant coffee ground fine, which sounds like a mistake until you taste what it does to the crust. Every year I make that dinner, and for one night Diane remembers everything, every single detail, because some memories get carved so deep that even a failing mind can't touch them. Our son Marcus is 34, smart as anything, went to business school, on a partial scholarship I was so proud of, I nearly cried at the graduation. These days, he sells commercial real estate downtown and married a woman named Brianna who works in event planning and has never once, in 6 years, called me anything but Harold instead of Dad, which I let go because you pick your battles. Marcus never used to be cruel. He got sharper after he married into money-adjacent circles, started measuring things by price tags that never used to matter to him. He'd walk into my house and comment on the truck in the driveway like it was an insult to look at. Still driving that old Ford, Dad? You could lease something respectable for what you spend on repairs. Everyone would laugh, and Diane, God bless her, would pat my arm afterward like I was the one who needed comforting. He's just teasing, Harold. Maybe. But a joke stops being funny when it only ever lands on you and never once on the man saying it. I let it slide for years, same as any father would, because pride is a luxury and my son's presence in my life was not something I was willing to gamble on a bruised ego. That was the deal I'd made with myself, and I kept it longer than I probably should have. The anniversary dinner started out about as good as it gets. Late August, that gold evening light coming down through the maples, string lights just starting to flicker on, Diane in the blue dress I bought her for our 30th because she said blue was the color of a good memory. Marcus and Brianna arrived 40 minutes late carrying that $340 bottle like it was a peace offering for something, though I didn't know what yet. Brianna looked at the porch and said in that breezy voice of hers, "You really should get this pressure washed, Harold. It's looking a little tired." I said the porch had character. She laughed like I'd made a joke. We sat down, and for a stretch, it actually felt like old times. Diane told a story about the 2 of us dancing in the kitchen the week we moved in, No furniture yet, just a radio on the floor, and she got every detail right down to the song. I watched 20 years fall off her face while she told it. Then Marcus looked at the wine glass in front of me, the good glass I only bring out once a year, and he said, "That's a lot of wine for a man on blood pressure medication, Dad." I laughed it off, said 40 years earns a man a glass of wine. He reached across the table then, and for half a second I thought he wanted to top off Diane's glass. Instead, his forearm swept the bottle clean off the table, and it hit the edge of the porch and shattered. Wine running down through the porch boards I'd sanded and stained myself, pooling black in the grass below. For a second, the whole backyard went dead silent. Marcus looked down at what he'd done, and instead of looking sorry, he shrugged and said the line I understood later he'd been saving up. "Relax, Dad. It's just wine. Not like you were going to remember tomorrow anyway." Nobody laughed. Brianna's mouth made a small, tight line, but she didn't say a word. Diane's face went somewhere I couldn't follow, somewhere between confused and hurt, and that hurt me worse than the wine on the ground ever could. I pushed my chair back, my shoulder complaining the way it always does, and stood up. I'll admit something, because I promised myself I'd be honest telling this. For one full second, my first instinct was to apologize, to smooth it over, to tell everyone it was fine, no harm done, let's not ruin the night. That's what 30 years of being the family peacekeeper does to a man. It rewires the alarm system in your chest so that even when you're the one who got hurt, your first move is damage control for everyone else's comfort. If you've ever caught yourself doing that, apologizing for somebody else's cruelty just so the room can breathe easier, you know exactly the wiring I mean. Then I noticed Marcus's watch sitting on the porch railing, where he'd set it down earlier to help carry the folding chairs, a watch he never stopped mentioning cost more than my first car. While he reached over to refill his own glass with what wine was left, I walked to the railing and picked it up. He frowned. "What are you doing with that?" I didn't answer, because there wasn't a single thing left in me worth saying to him in that moment. I walked 8 steps to the edge of the koi pond I'd dug with my own hands, and I opened my fingers. It went down clean, no splash worth mentioning, just a soft settling into 18 inches of water among Diane's fish. I turned around and handed him back his own sentence, word for word in spirit. "Relax. It's just a watch. Not like you'll remember the cost tomorrow anyway." The yard went quiet for 3 full seconds. Then it exploded. Marcus was on his knees at the edge of that pond in an instant, sleeves soaked to the shoulder, cursing in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was 19 and wrecked his first car. Brianna gasped, like she'd witnessed a crime. And Diane, my Diane, looked at me with her eyes wide and said the sentence that cut deeper than anything Marcus had said all night. "Harold, what has gotten into you?" And there it was. The real wound of that whole evening, and it had nothing to do with wine or watches. My dinner had been humiliated. Years of small cuts had finally added up to something. And not once, not one single time, did my wife or my son ask if I was all right. The only casualty anyone in that yard could see was a hunk of Swiss machinery sitting at the bottom of a fish pond. I picked my keys up off the porch railing. Nobody stopped me. Backing my truck down the driveway, I caught one last look in the mirror. Marcus still fishing around in the water with his sleeve rolled up, Brianna pacing with her phone already out, Diane standing very still by the broken bottle like she couldn't decide which mess to look at first. I should have felt ashamed of myself. Instead, I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with my age. The other kind of tired. 20 minutes later, parked at a gas station, 3 towns over because I didn't trust myself to drive home yet, my phone lit up with a voicemail from Brianna, her voice shaking with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. "Harold, you have absolutely no idea what you just started." I played it twice, sitting there in the dark. She was right. I didn't know yet. But I was about to learn everything. For 3 days, nobody called to check on me. Nobody asked if the anniversary dinner I'd spent all week cooking had ended with me eating alone, standing at my own kitchen counter. What I got instead were 4 text messages, and I want to read you the exact wording because the wording is the whole story. Saturday night, from Marcus. "You need to pay for that watch, Dad. It was a limited edition." Sunday morning, from Brianna. "This is humiliating for the whole family. Everyone saw it." Sunday afternoon, from Marcus again. "If you apologize to Brianna and cover the watch, we can put this behind us." And Monday, from my own wife, the one that actually stopped my heart for a second. "Harold, please just make this right so we can all move on." Move on. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee going cold in front of me, reading those 4 messages over and over, doing the math on everything that wasn't in them. Not one, "Are you okay?" Not one, "What happened before the watch?" I looked around that quiet kitchen, the one Diane and I had eaten 10,000 breakfasts in, and for the first time in my whole marriage, I felt like a stranger renting a room in my own life. I went out to the garage that afternoon because that's what men like me do when the feeling gets too loud to sit with. The hinge on the tool cabinet had been sticking since spring, and I took the whole thing apart on a milk crate, dropped a screw, spent 10 minutes on my hands and knees, finding it under the workbench, muttering words Diane would have fined me a quarter for back when the kids were small. The entire time, the same film played behind my eyes. The bottle shattering, Marcus shrugging, Diane asking what had gotten into me. Around 4 that afternoon, my neighbor Gordon Alcott showed up in my open garage door. Gordon, 71, retired from the county road crew, walks a beagle named Biscuit past my house twice a day, whether Biscuit wants to go or not. He'd been at the party. Since Diane's memory started slipping, Gordon had taken to stopping by more, usually with some excuse about extra tomatoes from his garden. "You got a minute?" he asked. I held up the hinge, trying to save it from the trash. He nodded like that answered something and stepped inside, hands in his pockets, which worried me because Gordon Alcott can talk to a fence post for 20 minutes straight, and right then, he looked like he'd rather be somewhere else entirely. "Been chewing on Saturday," he said. "Haven't we all?" I answered. He didn't smile back. "Harold, that wasn't an accident. Marcus knocking that bottle." I set the screwdriver down. "I had a feeling," I said. "No," Gordon said. "I mean, I watched it plain as day." He looked at that bottle, then he swung his arm on purpose. I was standing right there. Something cold moved through my chest. Because suspecting a thing and hearing another man say it out loud in broad daylight are two very different weights to carry. Gordon glanced toward the driveway, like he expected Marcus's car to pull up right then, took a breath, and gave me the rest of it. "Back in June," he said, "I was walking Biscuit past your place on trash day. Marcus was out front with a couple of fellas in suits, real estate types by the look of them." I only caught one piece of what he said. "What piece?" I asked. My neighbor of 19 years looked me straight in the eye and repeated my son's words exactly. "Once Mom and Dad can't manage the place anymore, this whole lot's getting subdivided. Prime location for 4 townhomes." For one second I genuinely believed I'd misheard him. My hearing isn't what it used to be. But we were standing 3 feet apart in a silent garage, and I'd caught every single syllable clean. I laughed once, not because anything about it was funny, but because my body didn't have another response ready. My house. The house where Marcus learned to ride a bike in that same driveway. The house where Diane, on her good days, still remembers exactly where every piece of furniture belonged the year we moved in. Already carved up, already sold off in his head. He was just waiting on the vacancy. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with an old photo album and took the whole tour. Marcus at 7, gap-toothed, holding up a crooked birdhouse he'd built for me at scout camp. Marcus at 17, unimpressed at his own graduation photos. Marcus at 26, laughing beside his mother at something I've long since forgotten. Then the newer pages, Marcus and Brianna at Thanksgiving. Marcus and Brianna in my kitchen, his arm around her waist, his smile switched on like a light fixture. And me, off at the edge of every frame, sometimes cropped clean out, usually because I was the one holding the camera. I ran my thumb over an old photo of Diane and asked the empty kitchen, did I miss all of this happening? I don't know who exactly I was asking. God, myself, maybe both. Had I made myself so small trying not to lose my son that I disappeared from the corner of my own family portrait? I picked up my phone to call Diane in the other room, just to hear her voice, and then I remembered Brianna's message playing in my head. "You have absolutely no idea what you just started." I set the phone down and made the first decision in years that had nothing to do with making somebody else comfortable. No shouting, no groveling, no posting anything online about it. I was going to watch, carefully and quietly, the way you listen to an engine that's about to tell you something true. Because if Marcus believed getting older made a man harmless, he'd made the mistake of confusing my silence for surrender. And 34 years climbing utility poles teaches a man that quiet doesn't mean broken. After Gordon's visit, I stopped seeing Marcus as simply rude, and started seeing him as a man running a schedule. Every visit, Every offer to help out suddenly looked like an invoice waiting to print. I told nobody, confronted nobody, and from the outside my life looked exactly the same. On the inside, I was running diagnostics. The first pattern showed up fast. My future had become everybody's favorite topic of conversation. Brianna stopped by one Wednesday with 2 coffees, and for half an hour it was almost pleasant talk of her latest listing, my tomato plants, the raccoon that keeps raiding the koi pond. Then, stirring her coffee without looking up, she said, "Have you and Diane ever talked about a smaller place? Something one level, easier to manage?" I watched her over my mug. "This house keeps us busy," I said. "Your shoulders, Harold. The stairs, with Diane's memory the way it is." "We appreciate the concern," I said. And then, casual as a weather forecast, "Do you know where the two of you keep the deed and the insurance paperwork?" There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, just set down on the table like a coaster. "Everything's organized," I said, and gave her nothing else, and watched a small flicker of disappointment cross her face, a flicker I'd have missed a month before. The following weekend, Marcus showed up carrying a replacement bottle of wine, the first gift he'd brought to my house in over a year that wasn't a suggestion disguised as a compliment. He praised the tomatoes, asked about the truck without the usual sting in it, offered to pressure wash the porch himself, free of charge, this weekend even. "I've got it handled," I said. "I like doing it myself." I caught the quick flat look he traded with Brianna, the kind married people share when a rehearsed script goes sideways. That look bothered me more than any insult all night, because insults are just weather passing through, but a look like that is climate, something you live inside permanently. A week after that, he tried again, while I was under the truck changing the oil. "You still do this yourself, Dad? At your age?" "I enjoy it," I said. "You know, property values on Larchmont are through the roof right now. If you and Mom ever wanted to simplify, cash out, get somewhere warm for her." "Not a Florida man," I said, and kept working the wrench. He laughed his networking laugh. "You won't want to keep up all this forever, though." I slid out from under the truck and looked at him a beat longer than was comfortable. "Marcus, I've lived in this house 36 years. The day I don't want it anymore, you'll be the first to hear it from me." His smile went stiff at the corners. "Fair enough," he said, and left inside of 5 minutes. That conversation stuck with me longer than it should have, not because it scared me, but because it sounded rehearsed, like a listing presentation he'd practiced out loud in his car on the drive over. The following Tuesday, I had a routine appointment with my attorney, Philip Nanez, a man who'd handled my will for close to 20 years, and once let me beat him at golf badly enough that we agreed never to speak of the scorecard again. I'd come in to update a beneficiary form, nothing more. Philip finished the paperwork, slid the folder across his desk, then leaned back in his chair and said, "Harold, I've been going back and forth on whether to tell you something." My stomach tightened. "Go ahead." "Your son called this office a few weeks back." "About what?" I asked. "He didn't ask about your file directly," Philip said carefully. "He asked general questions, the kind people ask when they're worried about aging parents. He wanted to understand how guardianship works when a spouse has memory issues. Whether a house can be sold or transferred if one owner is declared incapacitated, whether power of attorney automatically passes to the adult child." My jaw locked tight enough to crack a molar. "What did you tell him?" "The only thing I legally could," Philip said, with the ghost of a smile. "Nothing. He never used your name." He didn't have to. We sat in that silence together, two old men reading the exact same page of the exact same book. Finally, Philip said, "I don't like assuming the worst about family, Harold." "Neither do I said. "But those weren't curiosity questions." "No," he agreed. "Those were logistics." I drove home slow that evening, not because of traffic, but because every mile dissolved another excuse I'd been propping up for months. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe it's just how business-minded people talk. Maybe Brianna will rein him in. Maybe I'm being too sensitive about an old man's pride. One by one, every excuse fell away and left nothing standing. That night, I stood in my garage, the one room in that whole house that's always felt entirely mine, tools hanging exactly where my hands expect to find them, and I picked up the framed photo from our 25th anniversary, Diane laughing because I'd burned the first batch of burgers black, I ran my thumb over the glass and said out loud to nobody, "They think getting old means it's all right to plan around us, instead of with us." The garage didn't answer me back, but somehow Diane, in my memory of her sharpest self, did. The next morning I called Philip before 8. "I want to make some changes," I said. "What kind?" he asked. "The kind," I told him, "that makes sure nobody ever again mistakes my kindness for a blank signature." Here's what surprised me most through all of it. The paperwork was never about revenge, and Philip never once treated it that way. He asked me a single question that reframed the entire situation for me. "What outcome lets you sleep at night, Harold?" I thought about it honestly and told him, "I don't want to punish my son. I just never again want somebody planning my life without asking the man actually living it." So that's exactly what we built over 2 meetings and a session with a certified elder law specialist. An irrevocable trust with an independent professional trustee, no family members named anywhere on it, updated healthcare directives naming a neutral party as backup, not Marcus. Rewritten power of attorney documents that made it plain in black and white language that nobody stepped in over Harold or Diane Whitfield because they'd unilaterally decided they knew better. No traps, no hidden recordings, no theatrics planned. Just a grown man quietly locking his own front door from the inside. The day those papers were signed, I noticed something strange. Marcus got smaller in my head, all on his own, without me doing a single thing to shrink him. Gordon showed up one Saturday morning with 2 coffees and one question. "You still got that '68 Mustang project sitting under the tarp?" "Needs a whole new clutch," I told him. "There's a car show out at the fairgrounds next month," he said, shrugging the way men our age do when we're being careful with each other's loneliness without saying the word out loud. Might be time. I almost said no out of pure habit. Then I heard Diane's voice from years back, before the memory trouble started, clear as if she were standing right beside me. "You're allowed to have a hobby too, Harold." The following month, Gordon and I stood in a gravel lot full of old Mustangs and Chargers and more stories than sheet metal, drinking bad coffee from a thermos while strangers argued transmissions like it was foreign policy. Nobody in that lot asked what my house was worth. Nobody priced my watch, because I wasn't wearing one anymore. One gray-bearded fellow spent 20 minutes telling me about restoring a GTO with his granddaughter. Driving home, I realized I'd laughed more in 3 hours than I had in the previous 3 months combined. The following week, I started volunteering Thursdays at a shop that trains disabled veterans in basic auto repair, alternators, brake jobs, the occasional transmission swap. I came home, covered in grease every Thursday night, and lighter every Friday morning. Funny thing about helping strangers rebuild something. It reminds you that you're still worth something at the exact moment your own family seems to have forgotten it. A month after the anniversary, Marcus called. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Around," I said. "You've been hard to get a hold of." "Been busy doing what?" he asked. "Fishing, car shows, volunteering some." A pause. "You never mentioned any of that before." "You never asked," I said. Silence on the line. Not an angry silence, just a genuinely unfamiliar one. For 34 years, I'd built my whole calendar around fitting into everybody else's. Now they were going to have to learn to find room in mine, and neither of us knew the steps to that particular dance yet. One evening after supper, without planning to, I pulled a legal pad across the kitchen table and wrote my son a letter. Not an angry one. Not a lawyer's letter. The true one, about his mother, about how frightened I've been watching her memory slip a little more each season, about why I swallowed every small cruelty for years because I genuinely believed standing up for myself would cost me my only child. And near the bottom, my pen wrote a line that surprised even me as I wrote it. "I never once needed you to choose between your wife and your father. I only ever needed you to notice when somebody treated your father like he didn't matter." I stared at that sentence a long while, because it was true, and true things carry a weight of their own. I folded the letter, sealed it, wrote his name on the front, and set it in the top drawer of the desk in the front room. He wasn't ready for it yet. Maybe I wasn't either. A few days later, Gordon leaned on my fence while I washed the truck. "You hear the latest," he said. "Your son's telling folks around town you've gotten paranoid in your old age." I laughed once dry. "That's a new one," Gordon grinned. "This part is worse. He's organizing some kind of family sit-down to, quote, clear the air." Neither one of us believed that phrase for a single second. 2 nights later, Brianna called. her voice careful in a way it never used to be. Marcus wants everybody together Saturday to sort things out. Will you come? I looked out across my backyard, the maples throwing long gold shadows over the koi pond, and noticed something I hadn't expected to feel. I wasn't dreading it. I wasn't planning to walk in there and defend myself or beg anybody for respect. That particular season of my life was already over. I'll be there, I said, calm as any Sunday. She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath the whole call. Thank you, Harold. And then I made one more call. Philip, I think it's time. He didn't ask time for what. He just said, I'll meet you there. Now slow down with me here, because this is the part I've replayed 100 times since, and you've earned every second of it. Saturday came in warm and bright, the kind of afternoon made for grilling, and instead I drove to Marcus and Brianna's house with my attorney's sedan trailing behind me in the mirror, and the strangest passenger rode shotgun the whole way there. Peace. A month earlier I'd have rehearsed every argument the entire drive. That day there was nothing left worth rehearsing. The truth doesn't need a script. Philip stepped out of his car with his slim leather folder and asked, Ready? We're not walking in there to start a fight. I know, I said. We're walking in there to stop pretending. Marcus and Brianna's house sits on a cul-de-sac in a development Marcus loves calling his dream home, though he tends to leave out which bank is doing most of the dreaming for him. Inside, everyone was already gathered. Marcus, Brianna, her parents, my sister Louise, my nephew Tim, and Gordon, invited, I learned later, because Marcus had heard he'd witnessed the whole anniversary incident and wanted him managed ahead of time. The room went quiet the second Philip and I walked in. Marcus clocked the attorney immediately and let out a short laugh. You brought a lawyer? Seriously? I smiled, polite as church. I brought a man who's very good with paperwork. Marcus's grin widened. Dramatic much. Meanwhile, Philip shook hands around the room, calm as any Tuesday afternoon. Brianna's mother searched my face. Harold, what exactly is this? I believe, I said. Marcus wanted to clear the air. I do, Marcus announced, planting himself by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, hosting his own intervention in his own living room. We've all been pretty uncomfortable since the anniversary. He scanned the room slow. I think Harold owes everybody here an apology. Harold, not Dad. Funny how respect leaves a family one word at a time, same as everything else does. Philip glanced my way. I gave him the smallest nod, and the folder opened. What's that? Marcus said, smile still hanging on by a thread. Philip's voice was the same level, unhurried, inevitable voice I'd heard across his desk for 2 decades. Harold asked me here today because some misunderstandings have developed regarding his and Diane's estate and their future care. Marcus laughed once. What estate? Philip didn't look up from the folder. Over the past several weeks, we've finalized a complete plan, an irrevocable trust. One folder onto the coffee table. Updated healthcare directives. A second folder. Revised powers of attorney naming an independent professional as fiduciary. A third folder. The temperature in that room changed all at once. Brianna's mother blinked hard. You did all of this? Yes, I said. I had no idea, Brianna said. I know, I said gently. Marcus crossed his arms. I don't see why we need to be discussing any of this right now. Philip looked at him directly for the first time. I think you do. And for the first time all afternoon, my son stopped smiling. Philip folded his hands. Some weeks back, he said, a caller reached out to my office asking general questions. Brianna's mother frowned. What kind of questions? Philip kept his eyes on Marcus. About guardianship. About how a house transfers when one owner becomes incapacitated. About power of attorney. The word guardianship landed in that room like a dropped socket wrench. Silence. Somewhere, a clock in that house was ticking louder than it had any right to. Brianna's head turned toward her husband, slow as a door swinging shut on its own weight. You called Harold's lawyer? Those were hypothetical questions, Marcus said, too fast. I'm sure they were, Philip said pleasantly. I work in commercial real estate, Marcus said, louder now. People in my industry ask about estate structures all the time. Thousands of people work in real estate, Philip agreed. They don't typically phone their father-in-law's personal attorney to ask how an old man loses control of his house. Nobody in that room breathed. Marcus's mother-in-law looked down at the carpet, Brianna stared at her husband like a stranger had just unzipped his own face in front of everybody. Why? She whispered. Marcus threw his hands up. You're all making this sound way worse than it actually is. I was planning ahead. For what? Brianna said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. For our future. For all of us. My daughter-in-law took one slow step backward, physically backward, away from her own husband, and said the sentence I will carry with me for the rest of whatever years I've got left. Harold's future is not your investment portfolio. The ceiling fan turned overhead. Nobody moved. Marcus scanned the room for reinforcements, his in-laws, my sister, my nephew, and found nothing waiting for him but floorboards and folded hands. Then Gordon Alcott, 71 years old, cleared his throat from the corner of the room. I saw the whole thing at the anniversary, he said. Every head turned. That wasn't an accident, him knocking that bottle. That's ridiculous, Marcus snapped. Gordon didn't raise his voice a single note. Men like Gordon never need to. I've known Harold 19 years, he said, looking Marcus dead in the eye. You looked right at that bottle before you swung your arm into it, and I heard you back in June, out front of his house, talking to some men in suits. Marcus's face lost its color a shade at a time, like a screen slowly dimming. Gordon recited it plain. Once Mom and Dad can't manage the place anymore, this whole lot's getting subdivided. Prime location for 4 townhomes. Brianna turned back to her husband one final time, her voice barely above a whisper. You told me that joke about his hearing aids was just teasing. Everyone's blowing this whole thing out of proportion. No, she breathed. It really wasn't. That's when I stood up, not in anger. I wanted the whole room to hear this next part at ordinary conversational volume. I didn't come here today to embarrass anybody, I said. I came because I spent 36 years building a home with my wife, and I wanted my retirement to be about fishing, old cars, and dinners at that same table on Larchmont Drive. I looked straight at Marcus. I never cared about the watch. I cared that you found humiliating your own father funny in front of a room full of people. And I cared even more, I said, turning to face everyone, that somewhere along the way I let myself believe keeping the peace was the same thing as accepting disrespect. I was wrong about that for a very long time. The silence that followed wasn't tense, and it wasn't awkward. It was simply honest. Maybe the first fully honest silence that family had shared in years. Philip clicked his folder shut, quiet as a period at the end of a sentence. I believe our business here is finished, he said. Nobody stopped us at the door. Behind me, Brianna said one word, Harold. I turned, and she stood there with 100 sentences caught in her throat and not one of them able to move. Then she simply started to cry. I gave her a small, sad nod and walked out into the sunlight. In the driveway, Philip asked how I felt. I started the truck and looked for the right word. Lighter, I said. He nodded the way a man does when he's seen it 100 times before. That's what happens, he said, when people finally put down what was never theirs to carry in the first place. I drove home with the windows down for the first time in longer than I could remember. And here's the lesson that whole afternoon left me with, the one I'd ask you to actually hold on to. The mistake most people make is believing boundaries are walls you build to keep people out. They're not. They're the paperwork of self-respect. And the people who scream loudest about them are almost always the ones who had plans drawn up for your open door. Life didn't turn to sunshine and easy answers after that meeting. Real life never does. I still woke at 5:30 out of old habit. My shoulder still complained on cold mornings. Diane's memory still slipped a little further some weeks and steadied itself others. Some things don't change just because you finally told the truth out loud in a living room full of people. 3 days later, Marcus called. I let it ring through, not out of punishment, just because I didn't have the words ready yet, and went and mowed the lawn instead. A week after that, he knocked on my door in person. He looked wrung out, dark circles, no armor left on him at all. Can I come in? He asked. Of course, I said, and put on coffee. He sat down in the chair he'd sat in as a boy without thinking twice about it, then froze halfway into it. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, using the word for the first time in months. It's all right, I said, and meant every syllable of it. We didn't touch the coffee for a good 5 minutes. Then he said, I didn't think of it as really hurting you. I told myself it was just business sense. I believe that you told yourself that, I said. and watched him decide to be braver than that excuse. But that's not the whole truth, he said, staring down into his mug. I saw the way Brianna looked at your house from the first year we were together. I let it become a plan instead of just noticing it and stopping it. His eyes filled up. I should have stopped it years ago. I put my hand over his on the table and told him the truest thing I had left to give. You loved the easy version of the future more than you loved being uncomfortable enough to say no to her. That's a thing a man can still fix, if he wants to badly enough. He nodded and cried the quiet kind of crying that comes from finally setting something heavy down. When he left, he hugged me harder than he had in years, and I let myself hope, just a little, that we'd turned some kind of corner. We hadn't. Not yet. 2 weeks later he was back, angry this time, not at me, at the wreckage itself. Brianna says everyone ganged up on the two of us that day. I nodded. She says Gordon exaggerated what he saw. I see, I said. She says your lawyer ambushed us. I said nothing at all to that one. Then came the question he'd actually driven over to ask. Can't we all just move past it, Dad? I looked at my son a long moment. Then I got up, walked to the front room desk, opened the top drawer, and took out the envelope with his name written on the front. I wrote you this, I said. He reached for it, and I gently pulled it back. Not yet. His face fell. Why not? Because you're not ready for it, I said. And because right now you're still more worried about managing Brianna's version of events than sitting with your own part in this. He wiped at his eyes and said, I don't know what to do from here. You don't have to solve all of it today, I told him. He hugged me at the door, and neither one of us said his wife's name out loud that whole visit. Another month turned over. Summer eased into fall, the maples going gold and then bare. Thursdays still belonged to the veterans shop. Saturdays still belonged to Gordon and whatever car show was closest that week. For the first time since Diane's diagnosis, I wasn't just getting through the days anymore. I was actually living inside of them. Then one cool October afternoon, a third knock came at my door. Marcus stood on the porch alone, and something in his face had settled, calmer, older, cleaner than I'd seen it in years. He sat down and said 2 words. I left. I didn't push him for details. He gave me the one that mattered most on his own. I asked her a single question, he said. I asked if she'd have wanted me to treat you that way if it had been her own father sitting at that table instead of mine. He looked at his hands. She couldn't answer me, Dad. Not one word. I closed my eyes for a second, mostly for Diane, mostly for the woman she used to be who would have known exactly what to say to him in that moment. Then Marcus said the sentence that told me my son had finally come all the way back. I spent years telling myself I was just keeping the peace between everybody, but all I was really doing was asking you to carry the whole weight of it alone, every single time. And then he surprised me. He stood, walked to my refrigerator, and pulled out a butcher paper package. 2 prime rib roasts. I stopped at Higgins Market on the way over, he said. You cooking dinner tonight? I asked. If you'll let me help, he said. And for the first time since Diane's memory started slipping away from us in pieces, someone stood beside me at that grill instead of waiting at the table for it to be done. The coals crackled and caught. My son reached for the recipe card in the drawer, pulled out the one gone soft at the corners, and squinted at Diane's handwriting. The instant coffee goes in with the rosemary, right? Right, I said, and my voice didn't hold entirely steady on that word. He laughed through something close to tears. I finally understand why these dinners always mattered so much to you. So do I said. Now, more than I ever did before. When the meal was ready, he carried my plate out to me himself, careful with both hands, set it down in front of me, looked me straight in the eye, and said 6 words. Eat it while it's hot, Dad. I don't think he'll ever fully understand the size of that sentence. Months earlier, somebody had knocked my dinner and my dignity to the ground in front of a yard full of people to prove a point about what I was worth. Now my own son was standing guard over my plate like it mattered. No speech, no ceremony to it, just respect, served warm. He and Brianna finalized their divorce quietly the following spring. No courtroom theatrics, no victory lap on my end. Honestly, I felt more grief over it than anything resembling satisfaction. No father wakes up hoping to see his son's marriage end. But I'd learned something in the middle of all of it that I can't unlearn now. A family cannot survive on respect that only ever flows in one direction. These days, dinner at the house on Larchmont still happens most weeks. The guest list is shorter than it used to be. Some Sundays it's just Diane and Marcus and me. And on her good days, she still remembers every single ingredient in that rub without needing the card at all. Some weeks, Gordon wanders over, or a couple of the veterans from the shop stop in after their meetings. The table's not as full as it was for most of my life, but nobody sitting at it anymore is performing for anybody else's comfort, mine included. Every so often, I catch myself glancing over at that koi pond. The watch is long gone, still down there somewhere under the lily pads for all I know. What actually stayed with me wasn't that quiet little splash. It was everything I finally came to understand in the months after it. I used to believe that protecting my family meant absorbing whatever they decided to hand me, no matter how it landed. I don't believe that anymore. Getting older doesn't make a man worth less. It just means you've finally logged enough miles to tell the difference between love and obligation. And once you learn to tell those two things apart, friend, the whole rest of the road gets a lot lighter to walk. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually try this week, and it won't cost you a single dime. The next time somebody's little joke lands on you, the same target every single time, say one calm sentence back to them. That one lands on me, not with me, and leave it right there. No anger in it, just plain fact. You'll learn everything you need to know from whatever they do next. And here's the question I want to leave sitting on your table tonight, the one I chewed on for years longer than I should have. How much of what you've been calling keeping the peace in your own family was really just you keeping quiet? Now it's your turn, because I've second-guessed that watch going into the water 100 times since. Put a 1 in the comments if you think the pond was the right answer. One quiet gesture after years of noise. Put a 2 if you think I should have used plain words that night instead of letting $300 of Swiss steel do the talking for me. Put a 3 if you think I waited entirely too long, and the real mistake wasn't the watch at all, it was 6 years of swallowed insults before it. Some nights I'd vote 3 myself, if I'm being honest with you. Tell me what town you're listening from, and what time it is where you are tonight. It amazes me every time how far these small backyard stories manage to travel. And if you've ever been the one at the table everybody's just teasing, or the parent whose own children forgot to ask if you were all right, tell me down in the comments. Somebody watching this tonight is rehearsing an apology in their head for something that was done to them, and they need to hear, from a stranger if nobody else, that they're allowed to finally put it down. If any part of this meant something to you tonight, subscribe and stick around a while longer. I've got a whole lifetime of these stories left to tell, and this little corner of the internet only stays lit because folks like you keep coming back to it. Thank you truly for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.